the Plantagenet. There's France. And around the year 1100 or something, there was Geoffrey, the Count of Anjou. And he was out hunting, and when his head fell down and he picked up his head with yellow flowers. And then he wore flowers as a badge. Planta, genista in French. That is the beginning. Now, he had then a son together with Matilda. Matilda was the daughter of Henry I, the King of England, who was the son of William the Duke of Normandy in northern France. Geoffrey the Count of Anjou had together with her a son, Henry II. Geoffrey the Count of Anjou also conquered the Normandy. His son Henry II went over the channel one day to stand up against Stephen, who was, I think, the cousin of Matilda. And they then agreed, Stephen and Henry II, that Henry II becomes, after Stephen, the new King of England. His mother Matilda was the daughter of Henry I, the King of England. There were 19-long years of civil war between Stephen and Matilda. Now, Henry II is not ruling, and with that, there is the first Plantagenet King of England. 14 kings were 331 years were they ruling. The book is saying there were two dynasties. The first dynasty was ruling over parts of France, England, so the one with Henry II, and then also Jerusalem. And the second dynasty was ruling over parts of France and Poland, Hungary, Naples, and for some time Sicily. And these 14 kings, let's look what we were able to say of them. So this was the first one, Henry II. And then he was followed by Richard I, Richard Lionheart. And then John Lackland also. And then it was Henry III, and then Edward I, Edward II, and Edward III. And then Richard II. And then, for some reason, the book isn't saying why, it split it off into two houses. So a part of two dynasties, there were now two houses. The House of Lancaster and the House of York. The House of York seemed to came later, or had been only later a ruling king. Probably that. Now, first the second dynasty, that was Charles, and he was the younger brother of King Louis IX of France, who had given Charles then Anjou to rule. Anjou seems to be the English name for Angevin, and the Angevin kingdom was a big kingdom ruled by the first dynasty of Plantagenet, from England down to southern France. A part of it now, for some reason, I don't have all the information, a part of it was now ruled by Charles I, ruling Anjou, and then also did he got through marriage the Provence in southern France, and from the Pope in 1266, Naples and Sicily. He lost Sicily, but he continued to rule Naples and the other parts. And he had then also the name Charles I, but it can't be the same Charles I who then later was in England in the 17th century with the Civil War. So he was ruling there, Sicily was lost. And he was then followed by Robert and by Joanna I of Naples and Sicily. Now, back to the other dynasty, it split it off into the House of York and Lancaster. Lancaster was first ruling, and then later kings of the other house. And it was when Henry IV, Henry V, and Henry VI. And then the House of York was ruling. That was when Edward IV and Edward V, and then Richard III. Richard III was ruling until 1485. The book isn't saying anything more to this, but 1485 was the Battle of Bosworth Field, the decision-making battle of 30 years of civil war in England during the 15th century between the House of York and the House of Lancaster. And there Richard III was killed, and Henry VII became new king. So if I see it correctly, we have here the House of Lancaster and the House of York, Henry IV, V, and VI, and then the House of York, Edward IV and V, and Richard III. And now they two are having civil war in 30 years, and then it becomes Henry VII. Henry VII wins the Battle of Bosworth Field, in which Richard III died. He marries actually the niece of the House of York, Richard VII, and then it goes on with the Tudors. That is the Plantagenet, or the Plantagenet. According to the history of the kings and queens of England and Scotland on the page 54 and 55. The positions and views expressed are the ones of the source and don't necessarily align with my own or with the ones of the entity spoken of.